Hello, I'm Arif Fahrudin. Welcome to Asian Agribiz podcast. In this episode, my colleague Meliyana is speaking to Jessica Lee about purposes of vaccination in the poultry industry and how producers can ensure their vaccination works effectively to manage challenges in the farm. Ms. Lee is Veterinary Services Manager of Ceva Animal Health Asia. She oversees veterinary services related affairs in the region. She has experience in hatchery vaccination equipment and support, product registration, and field veterinary services.
Hi, Jessica. It's nice to have you in this podcast where we will be talking about vaccination. So, why don't we start this podcast with a short introduction of yourself and your company?
Hi, Melly. Thank you for this opportunity for me to be here in your podcast. I graduated from University of Putra, Malaysia in 2004 as a veterinarian. And I joined Ceva since then. And then I have the responsibility for products and also technicals for Ceva Malaysia during that time. And we had the experience in this hatchery vaccinations equipment and also field veterinary services and also vaccination support in the hatchery. I started to join the regional team in Asia as the veterinary services manager since the January of 2016. And since then, I helped the regional teams, Asia regional teams, to oversee the veterinary services related affairs since then. Ceva Animal Health is actually a multinational animal health company that based in Dupont, France. Is established since 1999, and we do a lot of research and developments, with productions and also marketing of the vaccines products and also some pharmaceutical products as well. And also on top of that, we provide services and equipments for poultry, for many others livestock as well, such as ruminants and swines, and also for companions animals.
Okay, let's
Okay.
roll. This is what you observe. Although so many vaccines are available and are used for animal disease prevention, producers often blame vaccination failure when diseases occur in farms. Do you agree? Can you explain why do we vaccinate and what can we expect from a vaccine?
Well, a lot of times that we hear producers are using vaccines and they face some of the failures. And of course, the failures may not be only just due to one factors, but it can be due to multifactorials. And I think from there on, it will be good that we can look into the details about the vaccine and also why we do the vaccinations. Well, there are three main purposes of vaccination in the poultry industry. First of all is to reduce the losses, okay, such as mortality or drop in egg productions due to the exposure of the flocks to certain pathogens. It could be viruses or bacteria. Secondly, the vaccinations, especially in breeders, all right, the purpose is to provide good amount of maternal derived antibodies to be transferred to the progeny and also to prevent the vertical transmission. And thirdly, why we do vaccines is also that we use the vaccines to reduce problems that related to food safety. And in this case, of course, we are talking about to ensure the consumer's safety. And from vaccine itself, what can we actually expect from vaccines? First, vaccines helps to protect the birds from specific clinical signs or lesions or mortality. that can come or due to the disease that is affecting the flock. For examples, Newcastle disease challenge in the broiler farms. And if the broilers are well protected by the vaccines, the flock will not face high mortality or severe lesions due to ND. Same thing if the ND challenge in layer farms, if the birds are well protected, there will be no serious drop in egg productions. However, and most of the time, vaccine do not induce this sterile immunity. So what do you mean by sterile immunity is that vaccines will not prevent the birds from being infected. For examples, Marek's disease vaccinations in layers and breeders. Eventually, these layers and breeders, even though they have received the Marek's vaccines in the hatchery, they will still be infected by the field Marek's virus, even though that they have received the vaccines, right? But even in that case, they are infected. These birds, if the Marek's vaccines given is giving the protections, the birds will not develop the Marek's clinical sign. Okay. Secondly, what can we expect from vaccines is that the breeder will be able to provide a good level of maternal-derived antibody, such as IBD, and also prevention of vertical transmission, such as for the case of avian encephalomyelitis, Rio inclusion body hepatitis, and also this chicken infectious anemia.
How do vaccines work in animal production? What are the different ways to administer vaccines?
These are very good questions, Melly. Well, a vaccine is a biological preparations that provides active acquired immunity to a particular disease. Vaccines typically that contains an agent, either it's a virus or a bacteria, that resembles the disease causing pathogens and is often made from attenuated or inactivated form of the pathogens. When the vaccine is being given to the birds, all right, as we're speaking on the poultry productions, the vaccines will trigger the bird's immune system to recognize the agents, the virus or the bacteria, as a threat. And then from there on, it started to build antibodies or other immunological factors against the disease, which later on it helps the birds to further recognize and destroy the agents when it is being challenged, let's say in the farms or when they facing the challenge during the production time. Okay. And what are the differences of ways of administering the vaccines? Well, in poultry productions, I must say there are many different ways of administering the vaccines. To simplify on this one, for examples, vaccines can be given through drinking water, spray, intraocular, or we call it eye drop, wing webs, subcutaneous, intramuscular, or even in ovo, which we can inject the vaccines into the amniotic fluids of the 18 days of embryo. So these are ways of administering the vaccines that is possible to be done in our today's these poultry productions.
Okay, now let's talk about when should vaccine be given. How can producers determine the right time to vaccinate, Jessica?
This is actually a very broad questions, but okay, we can give some examples on later on how we going to go into some specific diseases. Well, there are numbers of factors that need to be considered when deciding on the timing on the vaccinations. First and foremost is to determine which disease that we are dealing with. And then we need to consider the types of vaccines, whether it's a live attenuated or inactivated type of the vaccines, or immune complex or a vector vaccines. Okay, especially we need to consider this one is we need to know whether is it available in the country, especially that some new technology vaccine may be still under registration. And on top of that, we need to also understand the challenge of that particular disease in the farm, that where the bird is going to be located. All right. So if the vaccines are to be given at a young age, then we also need to consider whether there is an interference of this vaccine with the maternal-derived antibody. So with all this in mind, when we strategize the vaccination program or finding the right timing for the vaccinations, these are the factors that we have to consider. So for instances, infectious brucella disease, which is also known as Gumboro disease, today is very well-known disease among the broiler productions. To vaccinate the broilers against IBD using, let's say, the live attenuated IBD vaccines, we need to take into considerations of the interference between the passive immunity and the live vaccines. The right timing to give the vaccines is when the maternal-derived antibody has decayed to the breakthrough point of the IBD vaccines. For example, IBD titers of 500 ELISA unit, if we are using intermediate plus IBD vaccines. If these vaccines were given when the MDA level is still very high, the IBD live vaccine will be neutralized and there will be no immune response take place in the birds. Alternately, there are also new technology type of vaccines against Gumboro disease, such as immune complex and IBD vector vaccine that were also developed to bypass the interference of MDA. And for this kind of vaccine, it can be applied in the hatchery as early as day old or even through the in ovo vaccinations.
And then with so many vaccines available, how can producers choose the right vaccine for their animals? What should producers consider when selecting the vaccine to use, Jessica?
Yeah, good questions, Melly. No doubts that the advancement of the new technology today in vaccine development, there are really a lot of choices available in the markets for producers. To start choosing the right vaccine, the producer needs to know what situations of disease they are dealing with, and also the pro and cons, and also the vaccine efficacies of that particular available vaccines in their selections. All right. To better answer these questions, I would like to take an example of Newcastle disease, because this is a very common disease in Asia, and also there are plenties of many types of these ND vaccines available in the market, such as from live attenuated vaccine to inactivated and even vector ND vaccines. So assuming that in this case, the producer had to deal with a very early high challenge ND in their broiler farms. Okay, we're talking about broiler farms, high ND challenge at early age. So in the process of choosing the right vaccines or planning the right vaccination program, first, the producers needs to understand the characteristic of each type of the vaccines. Okay, for example, a live ND vaccines can induce a fast onset of immunity, especially local immunity, but they can also cause some reactions compared to inactivated vaccine, which can induce strong humoral immunity, but the onset of immunity is slower compared to the live vaccine. And on top of that, both the live and also the inactivated vaccine can be partially neutralized by the maternal-derived antibody. when it's given at day of age. And that leads us to consider the use of the vector vaccine which can escape from being neutralized, right? So that's the first thing that we have to understand about the characteristic of each type of the vaccines. Secondly, the producer needs to look into the efficacy of each type of the vaccines against the disease. These informations, of course, you can obtain from vaccine suppliers, or you can also do some research in the with some of the journals or research articles. The information should include results not only coming from laboratory testing, but also from the field situations, because that will be more relevant to how we're going to use this vaccine in the real situations. In the new technology vector vaccines, okay, I must bring this up, is that although the sounds of, I mean, that they are from the same kind of similar technology, but the construct of the vector indeed is very different among the vaccine suppliers. So at the end of the day, these different constructs can lead to a very significant difference in terms of the level of efficacies when we give it to the birds. So producer really needs to take times to look into the efficacy results or the studies of each of the different vaccines they're going to select. Okay, and thirdly, producer needs to consider whether they have the facility or the trained human resources to carry out the vaccination of that particular selected vaccines. For instances, vector ND vaccines need to be given at day 0 in the hatchery. So in this case, your producer needs to make sure that they have the facility and also the trained operators to do this vaccine. Or they need to source their chicks from suppliers that are able to provide these vaccines for them. If not, they have to think of other types of the vaccine, such as the live or the inactivated vaccines that is probably can be used in the farms, right? So overall, if you're talking about ND as an example in these questions, producers are advised to choose or consider vaccines that can provide a good early onset of immunity, have a low interference or no interference with the maternal-derived antibodies, strong immunity that can give a very strong protections, vaccines that have the ability to reduce virus shedding. This will really help in terms of the control of the spreading of the disease, and also are able to be administered in a young age, so that the birds will start to have or develop the immunity from a very young age in this case.
Interesting explanation, Jessica. So we know that vaccines are used for animal disease prevention, but does vaccination play a role as the main line of defense for that?
Well, as we understand that when we vaccinate the vaccines to the birds, the vaccines can trigger the bird's immune system to recognize the pathogens as a threat, and then the body of the birds can build the antibodies or other immunological factors against the agents, the virus or the bacteria. And when the birds are come into contact with the pathogens, they will be able to show protections. They will protect the birds against the signs of the disease or the lesions, or even prevent them from encountering this high mortality. At this point, we are saying that the flock is being protected from the disease outbreak. Okay, but however, to prevent the further disease problems in the farms, we need more than just the vaccines. We need also a stringent biosecurity to be implemented in the farms. This is to further reduce the incomings of the new pathogens from many possible ways, such as vehicles, such as humans or equipments, just to mention a few. Also, to have a proper cleaning and disinfectant after every batch of the birds. You have to practice an all-in, all-out system. On top of that, a good flock management from a very good, from giving a good quality feed to the birds to a good ventilations in the house is also very important to have, to continue the maintaining a good health and also a good immune status of the birds. So in overall, vaccines can play a role in, giving the protections to the birds. But on top of that, we also need to have like a good biosecurity and good management to always keep that the birds in a good health status.
Okay, so what are the reasons that vaccination might not work effectively? How can producers ensure vaccination will work?
In fact, the intrinsic qualities of the vaccines is well regulated by the official references, such as the European Pharmacopoeia or USDA, depends on where the vaccines are being produced. All the vaccines, before they receive marketing authorizations, they need to comply with the high standards of quality, the manufacturing procedure, potency, safety, just to mention a few. For a vaccine to work effectively, it's also about choosing the right type of the vaccine with the right strains and also the right vaccination program that suits the current challenge in the farm. On top of that, it is also not only just depending on the vaccine itself. Of course, vaccine, the intrinsic quality is very important. The whole process of administrating the vaccines, from how the vaccine is being stored, how the vaccine is being prepared, and how good is the administration quality is also very crucial to ensure that the vaccines can work properly. So now, assuming that the right type of vaccines, right strains, and right vaccination program had been decided by the producer for their new flocks. A few key points to ensure vaccination will work well is that firstly, we need to ensure that the birds are in good health on the vaccination day. I must say that this is the basic, but it's always been forgotten, right? As the saying goes, any vaccination program start with a good flock management. And if the birds are stressed, they are not in a good health status, they will have a less ability to fight the infections with or without the vaccines. So in this case here, we need to always make sure that the birds are in a good health status. Okay. Secondly is the proper vaccine storage and preparations. So overall, in general, vaccines such as the live vaccines, they need to be kept in cold chain around 2 to 8 degrees Celsius constantly in a specific refrigerator just for the vaccine itself. All right. And if we are using frozen vaccines, such as the Marex vaccine, it needs to be always kept in the liquid nitrogen at the negative 196 degrees Celsius. We also need to avoid exposing the vaccines to sunlight and also to check the shelf life of the vaccine. So we should not use expired vaccines in any case. And during the preparations, ensure that the operators had a set of this standard operating procedure that serve as the guidelines for anyone who is going to be involved in the vaccine preparations. They must follow. All right. This SOP needs to include all the details from the doses and the volumes of the water used, the temperature of the water, to all the diluents. Make sure there's no chlorine. It's always clean in terms of how the vaccine mixture going to happen, and also to make sure that the vaccines need to be finished within a period of time. All these details are very, very important throughout the whole process. Okay. And thirdly is the administration's quality. Okay. The most important part in administration is to ensure that the vaccines is being delivered to the birds. Okay. For example, drinking water administrations. This method is very commonly used in broiler farms for ND or IBD live vaccines. It is also very less stressful to the birds compared to individual handling. But a uniform vaccination is needed to be able to give all the birds a good protections. All right. And this uniform vaccination can only be achieved if all the birds drink the vaccine's water during the administration period, which is around 1 hour, 30 minutes to 2 hours. So we have to really keep a time check when we are doing a drinking water vaccination. And even during that period of time, we need to make sure that there's no chemicals such as chlorine, which can destroy the live vaccine. All right. Not to include this chlorine into the water supply 24 hours before, during, and also after the vaccination administration. Another example is the spray vaccination in the hatchery. Chicks are sprayed with the vaccine in the crates before sending them to the farms. And to have a successful spray vaccination, we need to ensure that the right volumes of spray per box, the right nozzle or for the right droplet size, and also a uniform distribution of the spray patterns to cover all the chicks in that particular box. So these are all very small details, but they're all very, very important to make sure successful spray vaccinations in the hatchery. And of course, in Ceva, we understand the importance of all these details of vaccination in hatchery. And from here, we actually provide this chick program, which is the Ceva Hatchery Immunization Control Keys to producer. So with this program, we will have a specialist team to visit the producer hatcheries to run some tests to make sure that the vaccine is well stored, the vaccine preparation is well done, the quality of the vaccination is well done as well. And on top of that, we also will make sure that the equipments are being maintained and also working properly during the vaccination day. So in overall that we need, if we want to make sure that the vaccination is well done, we need to really look into all the small details and also have a very strong SOP to make sure that all the steps are being followed.
Thanks for your explanation, Jessica. But I wonder, we know that vaccines are usually not used up in one administration. So should open but unused vaccine be safe, Jessica?
This is not easy to comment on this aspect, as we usually would recommend that once the vaccines has been opened, the vaccine should be used within the time limit or within the day itself, and the remaining should be discarded. Just an example, for live vaccine, one, it is mixed with the diluent. We need to use them within 1 to 2 hours. The leftover or even the vaccine that is not used up in 2 hours or within the time limit should be discarded as well, because the live vaccine virus titer may have reduced significantly. But in the case of inactivated vaccine, if there is such a situation where there's only a few hundred doses is needed from bottles of 1,000 doses, let's say, the operator can withdraw the needed volume using a sterile, clean, disposable needles, and clean the rubber stopper using alcohol after the withdrawal, and keep the remaining inactivated vaccine immediately back to the fridge, where it is kept in a cold chain temperature of 2 to 8 degrees Celsius. This bottle should be marked or labeled to ensure that it will be used the next day or the next vaccination. So try to use it as fast as possible. Well, having to say that, we indeed seldom or almost do not recommend this, as we concern that the steps in keeping the sterility, the sterility of the inactivated vaccines is not followed properly. We have seen operators cutting the bottles, pouring out the vaccine needed, and also keeping the remaining vaccines in the open bottle. And what could happen is that the vaccine will be contaminated with bacteria or other pathogens in the farm environments, and causes the infections to the birds that will receive the vaccines later on through subcutaneous or intramuscular injections. So yes, I must say that it is not really easy to comment on this, but if needed, I would say operators should follow a very stringent SOP when doing this, when they save the unused vaccines.
Okay. The last question I want to ask, where is vaccine technology headed, and what kind of vaccines can producers expect in the coming years?
Well, with the current intensive poultry farmings, which sometimes all these poultry farmings are located very densely in one area, and also with the evolvement of the disease that we can see that they are mutating or antigenically drift or shift, and also the spread that could easily happens in a dense area with some very contagious diseases. No doubts what we see is that the research and development is heading towards new technology vaccines, such as vector vaccines with inserts of more concerning disease, for example, ND, ILT, IBD, H5, and even H9, which sometimes can be single inserts or double inserts in a vector. Other technologies, such as immune complex, which also have been used in many countries now to control IBD, and also in many different kinds of different types of the birds, is also one of the technologies that is currently being very well known. Other technologies, such as subunit technologies, where it contains some purified parts of the pathogens that is antigenic or necessary to trigger this protective immune response. These are some of the technologies that the vaccines can be developed from. And of course, there are currently many studies on these new technology vaccines on different diseases. But however, it will take some time or some years even to refine, to test the vaccine candidates to suit the needs of the current challenge of the poultry industry. At the end of the day, what we hope to provide to producers are vaccines that could help and also to have a better onset, longer durations of immunity with the better reductions of challenge pathogens shedding, reduction of the sheddings, or reductions of transmissions that could eventually help producers to have a better control of the disease, and also more convenient in applications such as the one or the vaccines that can be applied in the hatcheries, whether through the subcutaneous route, spray, or in ovo. Also, as the welfare of the birds is also of concern, we also hope to have vaccines that needs less booster, especially when we are talking about long-living birds such as layers and breeder, which if we have less handling of the birds, we can assure a better welfare to the birds as well.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jessica, for sharing your insight in this podcast.
Thank you, Melly, for this opportunity for us to share our opinions and also to answer to many of the questions that is of concern of the producers.
Thank you for listening to another podcast by Asian Agribiz. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on Spotify, Apple Music, or wherever you get your podcasts.